Hi, hello, vanakkam, and welcome to Little Slaw YouTube channel. This is me, your Vasant Shanmugam, and for any queries or clarifications on any performance testing tools and techniques, you can reach me on my LinkedIn page at Vasant M. Shanmugam. You can email me to my email address at vasantpce@gmail.com. And today's topic is going to be how to set up ThinkTime in runtime settings and how to set up pacing and what are the type of pacing techniques does the LoadRunner provide and what is running the test as a process versus running the test as a thread in LoadRunner test execution and what will be the best choice to run the test and how to change the browser configuration in the testing and how to set up the proxy for the load test. So today's session is going to be very interesting. So kindly don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and share the videos to your friends. Let's now dive into the video. Hi, vanakkam and welcome to another episode on Little Slaw YouTube channel. So in our previous video, we saw how to create a script using virtual user generator, which is part of the LoadRunner, which is one of the component of LoadRunner. And we saw how to create a web application script using LoadRunner. So today, let us see about the runtime settings. Let us see about the runtime settings today. So the runtime settings will be part of the script which we have created. So to open the runtime settings, let's double click on it. So now we are into the runtime settings and we have different level of components and multiple components here in under this runtime settings, which comes under general, the browser, the network, the internet protocol, and the data format extension. So first we will see what are the components that we use under this runtime settings. So first let's start with the run logic that's under the general. And here under the run logic, we can see the number of iterations. So by default, it will be 1. So it runs once. So this can be used for validation of different test data that you have in LoadRunner for testing. So for validation purpose, we can use any number of iterations which we require. But during your load test, make sure you keep it as 1 because that will be taken under control and it will be automatically override in the load test settings. So for now, if we want to run this script twice or thrice, then we can set this to 2 or 3, and then we can run the load test and see how does it work. So for now, let me just choose 2. So you can see, we can see here that no any other container will change. Either it is a init, there's a v user init or the end, but it's only the actions folder. That is the actions folder will iterate the number of iterations that we have given here. So say for example, if we change it to 4, we can easily see here that it is changed to 4. So the number of iterations will only make changes to the actions folder. And next comes the pacing. So pacing is actually the delay that happens between two iterations. Say, for example, if we run two iterations and if we introduce a 30-second of pacing, which means the first iteration will complete and then it waits for 30 seconds before it starts the second iteration. So there are three different setup for the pacing part. One is start new iteration as soon as the previous iteration ends, which means there is no delay or a waiting time between every iteration. And then we have the second option, which tells us to start new iteration after the previous iteration ends with, and we have different options. So the first option is it's a fixed delay of 60 seconds, but we normally use a 30-second of delay. So that's the best practice we used to follow, which is a fixed delay of 30 seconds. But we have a different option as well, that is a random. So this random delay will give you a which normally selects a random variable between the minimum and the maximum seconds. So we can set a minimum of 30, or we can set a minimum of, we normally set it as a like a minimum of 25 to 35. So which means the average will come around 30 seconds. And then we have the third option, that is start the new iteration at a fixed interval after every few seconds. So we have fixed and then we have the random. So when we choose this, the new iteration will not begin until the previous one is complete. So it waits till the previous one gets completed. But for a fixed interval, we have to specify the numbers and the specific, and we have to fix the range. And then we have this random. So again, it's same. That is, we can choose the minimum and the maximum values. So the difference between the second and the third option is, in the second option, it tells us that the new iteration will be started after the previous iteration ends. But here the third option tells us that the new iteration will be started at a fixed intervals. Say, for example, if we are running an iteration, a script, which runs for 40 seconds, and then we have set here the interval, starting the iteration at 60 seconds. So after 40 to 60, the next iteration will wait, and the second iteration will start after the 60th second. But in the different case, what happens if the first iteration takes 65 seconds to complete its first iteration, and the second iteration will start right after the 60th second, and it will not wait for the previous iteration to get completed. So that's the difference between the second and the third options. So the second will wait till the previous iteration ends, but the third will wait only if it is under or if it is less than the defined seconds. If the first iteration takes more time than the fixed iteration, then the second iteration will start executing its transactions. So that's the difference. And it's often recommended to go with starting new iteration after the previous iteration ends with a fixed delay of 30 seconds. So that's the best practice that we used to follow. And also I would recommend the same. And then let's go for the third container or the third component that we have, that is logging, which is enable logging. So this will actually help us to understand what is happening during the validation of the script. And we have to make sure that this is disabled during the load test, since this will take a huge amount of the power of the machine, the CPU and the memory. So it's always advisable to make sure that this logging part is disabled during your load test and enabled during your validation. And then we have two different levels of logging, that is the standard log and we have the external log as well. This will help us to understand what is the parameters that we have substituted or we have used, and what all the data that has been returned by the server. And it also helps us to trace the advanced messages or the logs from the machine. And then we can include the environment information if required. And then we have the print timestamp for message functions. So log, yeah, as I already said, use it only during the validation and not during the load or any type of testing during the test. And then we have this think time. So you would have remembered that in our very first video of LoadRunner, we created a script and we have introduced think time, but none of the scripts have waited for the think time. It's because this is being ignored. So we have to make sure that before we do the test, we have to make sure that the think time is correctly configured. So there are a few options that we can set up here. So the ignoring think time will not take any think time value that we have given in the script. So let me just show you an example here. So if we run the script, so here we can see there are no waiting for the think time, even though we have given the think time in the script. We have a think time of 6 seconds at the 420th line, but we can see that it has not been recognized and it has been, okay, it's waiting for 30 seconds of iteration. I think let's stop the validation for now. Since we make some changes in the runtime settings for as two iterations, so that's the reason it was waiting for the next iteration to complete. So let's now go to this output and see what has happened. So let's go to this replay summary, and we can see here at the 420th line, or any line. Okay, let me just search for that think time. Okay, let me just take you through the other examples if we have. Okay, so for now, what I'll do is like, let me change the settings and we will see how does it work. So here we have an option that tells us to replay think time as recorded. So I'm selecting this and let us run the script and see how does the think time is behaving now in the script. And the normal think time which we set for every script is around 25 seconds between each transaction. So here we can see one of our steps have waited for 4 seconds, since that was the think time that has been recorded. And we can see here that the LR think time is waiting for 5 seconds before it moves to the next step, because the reason we have chosen here as a replay the think time that is being recorded. So that is the reason it's waiting for the n number of seconds that is being recorded during the script. So here for each and every think time, it's behaving the way that we have given there. So now it has been 25 seconds. So the test will wait for 25 seconds until it moves to the next step. And then we have completed the think time and we have moved to the next step. I think we can stop the validation for now. And let's now move to the next setup, that is multiply recorded think time by. So whatever think time that has been recorded or given inside the script will be multiplied by the number that we give here. Say for example, if I'm giving 2, and let's see. So before that, let me make some changes. So the last think time was around 25. So let me change it to 6. And now let's re-execute the script and see how does this multiplying by 2 works. So the script have started, and now we can see that the LR think time is waiting 8 seconds, since the recorded think time was 2 seconds, and we have given a multiplication of 2 times of our think time. And that's the reason the script waits for 8 seconds, since it's the think time is multiplied by 2 twice the think time that has been recorded. So this is how it works, and we can even do a multiplication of a number more than 1, or also we can do it even less than 1. Let me just show it for you. So let me stop this validation now, and I can give that a demo. I am giving as 0.01, 0.1, and I'm giving a demo of it. So now the 4 seconds multiplied by 0.1, which will be less than a second, which will be around 0.4 second. Yeah. So the think time has been completed as quickly as possible. Let me just show you once the, okay, you can see here. That the think time is recorded as 6 seconds, and since we multiplied it by 0.1, so then it has moved to 0.6 seconds, 0.60 seconds. So this is how it works. So for our design, we can increase or decrease the percentage, and we have other option as well, which is the increasing, or we can set up a random percentage of think time as well. That is whatever been recorded there, we can increase and decrease based on the random values. In fact, we can even limit the think time to a particular second. Say for example, if we want them to do wait them for 25 seconds, then yeah, that is even possible by doing this. So this will in fact reduce us or save us time in going into the script and making changes for each and every step. Instead of that, we can limit the think time. Say for example, if any of your script that has recorded a think time more than 25, so that will be limited to 25 seconds. But the think time that are less than or whatever is recorded will be will exactly run in that particular option. So since this is a checkbox, which means the options that we can choose from here. We have option to choose either one of this, but this is a checkbox, which means we can have an option to limit the think time. So we can choose it to limit to the maximum number of seconds that we have. And then we have this additional attributes. And next we have the miscellaneous part under the general, which is if in case we have any error in the application or in the script or in any of the errors that we have. So by default, if the script has any error in its execution, so automatically what happens is user, a new virtual user will start his iteration, but without ending his last step. But if we select this option, so what happens is the user will not start his new iteration. Instead, he will go till the end of the step. That is, he goes from the actions and complete all his actions, all his transactions in the actions folder. And if in case any transactions in the V user end, he'll complete, and then he'll come back and start his new iteration. So that's the reason. That's the use of choosing this continue on error. And then we have fail open transactions on LR error message. So this will help us to understand the errors that we face during the execution, and then generate snapshot on error. So this will give us an idea on what is the mistake or what is the reason for the error. So we can get an understanding on what is happening at the backend or behind the screen. So this will help us to understand or to generate a snapshot on error. So snapshot is something like a screenshot of what we are getting in the application. And then we have this multi-threading part. So there are two options. One is running vUser as a thread and running vUser as a process. So basically every tester who initially comes to run a test, so they will have this confusion whether I should run it as a thread or as a process. So let's now see the difference between running the test with these two options. So we have this running vUser as a thread, and then we have running vUser as a process. So in process mode, so this is a process mode, and what normally happens is the controller loads the same drive program into the memory again and again for every instance of the vUser. Say for example, if we are running a test for 100 users, so what happens is it will load memory again and again for each user. So which means 100 vUser instances will get created, and this in turn increases the need for RAM. So this will automatically slow down the host machine's speed and process. But in the other hand, we have running vUser as a thread. And this is the default one that we use normally for doing any test. So this actually makes the controller loads only one instance of the driver program for all the threads, that is for all the users. And these thread users share segments of the memory of the parent driver process. So each in turn saves a lot of memory and thereby enables more vUsers to run on single load generator. Then we might have a question: why do we have this option? Why should we need to do, or why should we even need to implement this? So there are some tuxedo process applications that we have as part of the LoadRunner. So they will need to run the test as a process, as a single process. So for that particular application or for that particular need, we were having this option of running vUser as a process. So running vUser as a thread will save a lot of memory, will save a lot of RAM during execution. But in the other case, running vUser as a process is very expensive in terms of memory. So that's the difference between these two options, and then we have this automatic transactions, and we have option to choose, that is defining each action as a transaction and then defining each step as a transaction. So by default we have chosen by define each action as a transaction, but still we will actually set up each transaction between LR start and LR end. So that makes sure that we have each transactions identified separately. And then we have this browser emulation. So this is something we have in all the tools, that is emulating the browser with the required browser configuration. So say for example, we have, give me a second, let me just minimize it. Okay. So say for example, we have this use browser. We can choose this and we can choose any browser type that we require. Say for example, if we are recording a script with a Internet Explorer, but we have a business requirement to test the application with the latest version of Microsoft Edge. So we can choose the latest version and again the platform as well. So nowadays we have an option to include the platform of Windows 11 and also the browser version to the latest one, and then the language as well. So which language that we need to test, so that actually gives us an idea of the localization that we used to say. In case if we don't find any of the settings here, we can actually choose the user agent string, which we can Google and find for any browser version and the type, and we can directly give it here. We can choose the use custom part, and we can give the setup or setting that we require, can give it here. And for the browser cache, so this will actually take care of this cache. So cache is something like the data that has been recorded or that has been stored if we continuously use the same data. So what happens at a point of time is, instead of the request going to the server to get the data, it actually takes the data from the server in case if we are using the same data again and again. So this actually simulates the browser cache. So whatever the browser that we are running for test, so this will actually simulate the browser cache. So in case if we want to avoid using the cache, we can uncheck this. So that will not store any cache, and instead the request will go directly to the server every time to fetch the data or fetch the response. And in case if there are any business requirement that the client or the stakeholders wants us to use a cache, then yeah, we can choose this part. And then download non-HTML resources. So these are something like a JavaScript or any other component that they want us to download during the testing. So that will automatically get downloaded. And then we have an option to simulate a new user on each iteration. So this is something like where we can clear the cookies, clear the cache. So if we check this option, so which means the cookies and cache will not be stored, and they will be treated as a new user. And in turn, any page that gets loaded will take all the data from the server every time, which means our first byte and the last byte will take little more time since they are new user. And if we, and like again, clear caching on each iteration will again, as I told you earlier, will again fetch any data from the server and not from your cache. And in case if there are some applications and some requirements that you want to have this cache during your test, we can better uncheck this, and this will automatically fetch the data from the cache instead of the server. And then let's now move to the network, where we go to the speed simulation. So it's always a best practice to test the application, the development, and once we get the application from the development and after the functional testing. So it's always advisable to test in all the speed simulations. So that will actually give us an idea of how the users, the real-time users, test the application, because not all of the users have the high configuration machines or the high configuration laptops with the latest versions or the high configuration mobile phones. So it's always advisable to try with the maximum bandwidth and the preferred bandwidth, we have different options. Say, for example, if we are testing a mobile application or any application that works on 5G or 4G network, so we have to choose these options, and this will help us to understand how does the application works for various set of users with various levels of speeds. And then we have an option to customize the bandwidth. And then we have this streaming part. Then let's now move to the internet protocol for the content check. In case if we want to do any content check during replay, we can add any content checks here. And then the proxy. So if we are under inside the client network, and if any application requires any proxy, then we can choose those proxy that are set up under the test or the client environment. And in any case, if we want to do a load test, it is always advisable to do the no proxy, and that actually gives us an idea of how the real-time users were doing the testing or using the application. Then let's move to the preferences part. So this will actually give us an idea about the various preferences that is enabling the image and text check. So during validation or even during the load test, we can actually use this to make sure that the correct page is loaded. So by enabling the image and text check will help us to understand that the correct page is loaded, and we don't need to rely only on the response codes. Then we have this web performance graph generation. That is the throughput and the HTTP codes and the response bytes per second. So they will help us in tracking the reports. And then we have this advanced. We have the various other options as well. We have the HTTP version. Which HTTP version we have to run the test? Either it is HTTP 1 or HTTP 2. So they have different set of configurations, and they can be enabled and disabled if we require. And then, as I already told you, like creating a snapshot during a replay will help us to understand how the or what kind of data has been replayed. So by default, they are not required for during the load test, but for during validation, we can use this to see the replay. So we have a lot of options here, and then we have this authentication. So in case if we need to make any authentication, we can add it here. And then again, the logging part, that is storing the logging values. And then we have this JavaScript. So in case if we need to enable running any JavaScript, we can run it, choose it here. If not, by default, they are not enabled. So just having this default, that is using the defaults, will help us to run a proper validation and a load test. And then the download filters. So in case if we want to filter any files, something that ends with a JPEG or any PNG files, which we feel is not required for testing, we can actually add that. So let me just add few URLs, so which we want to filter, something like .jpeg. In fact, we have this host and hot SFX as well, but for now, yeah. So this is enough. So in case if you want to add or if you want to filter any addresses, we can add it here. So this is something about the runtime settings. So just a quick recap. So we have seen the run logic, which is how many number of iterations that we want to test for during the validation. And we make sure we have to keep it as 1 before we start the load test. And then we have seen what is the pacing, what are the different set of pacing that we can use for testing and validation. And then we have seen the logging part. So how to use it and what kind of logging do we need to use for testing and validation. And then we saw about the various ThinkTime setup and the various miscellaneous part, that is handling, error handling, and how to run the multi-threading part, either which is as a thread or as a process. And then the browser emulation. So any browsers that we need to emulate, we can choose it here. And then the speed simulation, as I told you earlier. So selecting different speeds will give us an understanding of how the application works in the real-time environment. And then the proxy part. So if we are If you are asked to do a testing within the private network, then we can choose that proxy. And if not, we can choose the direct connection to the internet, where we can use no proxy for testing. So this is something about the runtime settings. So in our next session, we will see how to use the parameters. Yeah, so thanks everyone. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your feedback. Thank you so much.